What happens when a multimillionaire CEO, who thought he was in a perfect environment full of business challenges, discovers a shocking secret about one of his lowest-paid employees? It starts with a simple observation in the cafeteria, but soon spirals into a journey of redemption, sacrifice, and transformation. The clock struck 9:45 p.m. and Gabriel Murphy sat alone in his corner office on the 23rd floor of Murphy Enterprises. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, its lights twinkling like scattered stars. But tonight, Gabriel wasn't admiring the view. His focus was on a spreadsheet glowing faintly on his laptop screen. A document filled with numbers that represented profits, losses, and lives reduced to data points. He sighed, rubbing his temples as exhaustion began to creep in. It had been another long day of meetings, decisions, and endless emails. Yet something felt off. A nagging sensation he couldn't quite place. He glanced at the security feed displayed on a secondary monitor. Standard procedure for someone who valued control as much as Gabriel did. That's when he saw it. On camera 12, which monitored the cafeteria, a figure moved silently through the empty space. It was Jasmine Price, one of the junior administrative assistants. She wasn't supposed to be there this late. The cafeteria closed promptly at 6 p.m. and most employees left shortly after their shifts ended. So why was she still here? Gabriel leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Jasmine wore her usual modest attire, a short-sleeved shirt and trousers, but tonight, her movements were different. Purposeful and furtive. She approached the kitchen area where one of the chefs, an older man named Edward, stood waiting. They exchanged a few quiet words before Edward handed her a small insulated lunchbox. A lunchbox? At this hour? Gabriel frowned. What could possibly be inside? And why were they conducting what looked like a clandestine transaction? His mind raced with possibilities. Was she stealing food? Selling company property? Or was this something else entirely? Gabriel prided himself on knowing everything that happened within his empire, yet here was a detail slipping through the cracks. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, not curiosity alone, but perhaps a deeper instinct, he decided to investigate further. Grabbing his coat, Gabriel stepped out of his office and into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, he hesitated for a moment. This wasn't like him. Normally, he delegated such matters to HR or security. But tonight, something compelled him to act personally. He wanted to know what she was doing. Feeling also guilt, the kind that comes from living so far removed from the realities of those beneath you. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. When he reached the cafeteria, the room was eerily silent. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting harsh shadows across the stainless steel countertops and rows of empty tables. Jasmine was already gone, leaving behind only faint traces of her presence, a lingering scent of coffee, the faint echo of footsteps fading down the hallway. Gabriel walked over to the spot where she'd met Edward. There was nothing unusual at first glance, but then he noticed something tucked under the counter. A crumpled napkin bearing the faint outline of a child's drawing. Stick figures holding hands scribbled in crayon. A family portrait, perhaps? He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. As questions swirled in his mind, Gabriel realized he needed answers. Not just about the lunchbox, but about Jasmine herself. Who was she outside these walls? What drove her to risk being caught sneaking around after hours? Without fully understanding why, Gabriel made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. He followed her. Jasmine exited the building through a side door, taking the lunchbox and in a plastic bag. Gabriel kept his distance, careful not to draw attention to himself. The streets were alive with the hum of evening traffic and the glow of neon signs, but Jasmine seemed oblivious to it all. Her pace was brisk, almost frantic, as if she were racing against time. She got on a bus, and Edward quickly followed her from inside a taxi, but at a distance. She led him away from the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown and into neighborhoods he rarely visited. Here, the air smelled different, less polished, more raw. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting pools of uneven light onto cracked sidewalks. Buildings grew shorter, their facades worn and weathered. Children played on stoops, their laughter echoing faintly in the cool night air. Finally, Jasmine stopped in front of a small, dilapidated house. Its paint was peeling, and the porch sagged under the weight of years. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around nervously before stepping inside. Gabriel lingered across the street, his heart pounding. He had never ventured into a place like this before. Everything about it, the poverty, the struggle, the humanity, felt foreign to him. And yet he couldn't tear himself away. Something about this woman, this mystery unfolding before him, demanded his attention. As he followed Jasmine, Edward thought about the difficulties she faced in her daily life, from the traffic to work to why she would stay so late there. He searched for answers, but they were still out of reach, and he would not stop until he discovered this unknown part of her life. The air outside Jasmine's house was thick with humidity, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and distant rain. Gabriel stood frozen on the sidewalk, his polished leather shoes out of place amidst the cracked pavement. He watched as the dim light from inside flickered through the thin curtains, casting distorted shadows against the walls. The scene before him felt like a world apart from the sterile, controlled environment of Murphy Enterprises. He hesitated, torn between his desire to understand and the weight of invading someone's private life. But curiosity and a growing sense of guilt pushed him forward. Slowly, he crept closer, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. From his vantage point near a rusted chain-link fence, he could peer through the window into the small living room. What he saw stopped him cold. Jasmine knelt on the floor, surrounded by two young children, a boy no older than 7 and a girl who looked about 5. Their faces lit up when they saw her, though their smiles were tinged with exhaustion. She opened the lunchbox she had carried home so carefully, revealing its contents. A few pieces of chicken, some rice, and a couple of slices of bread. It wasn't much, but it was clear that this meager meal was meant to feed all 3 of them. Gabriel's chest tightened as he watched Jasmine divide the food onto mismatched plates. Her hands moved deliberately, almost reverently, as if each bite carried more meaning than sustenance alone. The children dug in eagerly, their hunger palpable even from where Gabriel stood. Jasmine barely touched her own portion, instead watching her kids with an expression that mingled love, pride, and something darker, desperation. "Eat slowly," she said softly, her voice barely audible through the glass. "There's enough for everyone." But Gabriel knew there wasn't. Not really. He could see it in the way she glanced at the nearly empty lunchbox, in the slight tremor of her hand as she pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. She was stretching scraps into meals, making promises she couldn't keep. The boy looked up at her suddenly, his wide eyes filled with innocence. "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Jasmine forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course we are, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine." Gabriel flinched at the lie, or maybe it was hope disguised as a lie. Either way, it struck him harder than any boardroom argument ever had. Here was a woman fighting a battle he couldn't begin to comprehend, armed with nothing but determination and scraps of dignity. And here he was, a man who commanded millions, standing powerless in the face of her quiet resilience. And Gabriel felt truly small. As the evening wore on, he continued to watch, unable to tear himself away. He saw Jasmine tuck the children into bed, their tiny bodies curled together under a threadbare blanket. He saw her sit alone in the darkened living room afterward, staring at the wall with an expression that spoke volumes about the weight she carried. She didn't cry, didn't break down. Instead, she simply sat there, shoulders slumped but head held high, as if bracing herself for whatever tomorrow might bring. Finally, Gabriel turned and walked away, his mind reeling. He called another taxi to go home, and while he waited, hiding near parked cars and garbage dumpsters, he thought again about the daily burden that this family had to carry. He was overwhelmed by a storm of emotions at an intensity he had never felt before: shame, anger, guilt, and something else he couldn't quite name. Returning to his penthouse apartment, Gabriel replayed the night's events over and over in his mind. Images of Jasmine's weary face and her children's hopeful eyes haunted him. How many others like her worked for his company? How many families were struggling silently, unseen by those in power? These questions gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. When he arrived home, the opulence of his surroundings only deepened his unease. The marble floors, the panoramic views, the art collection worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, it all felt hollow now. For years, Gabriel had prided himself on building an empire, on creating jobs and opportunities. But tonight, he realized how blind he'd been to the human cost of his success. Sitting in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk before him. Gabriel stared blankly at the city lights. His thoughts drifted to Jasmine's promise to her children. Everything's going to be fine. Was it? Could it be? And if not, whose fault was that? A new question began to form in his mind, one that would shape everything to come. What responsibility did he have, not just as a CEO but as a person, to ensure that promise wasn't empty? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. Gabriel Murphy couldn't unsee what he had seen, and once morning came, he knew he'd have to do something about it, even if he didn't yet know what that something was. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Gabriel's office, casting sharp lines of light across his desk. But despite the brightness, the room felt heavy with tension. Gabriel sat in his chair, staring at a blank email draft on his computer screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but no words came. For hours, he had been trying to figure out how to approach Jasmine, how to bridge the chasm between them without making her feel exposed or judged. Finally, he sighed and closed the laptop. This wasn't something that could be handled via email or even delegated to HR. If he wanted to understand and help, he would need to face her directly. With a deep breath, he picked up the phone and dialed her extension. "Jasmine Price, please report to my office at 10 a.m., he said curtly before hanging up. It was the kind of directive that usually sent employees into a panic, and as soon as the call ended, Gabriel regretted his tone. He hadn't meant to sound so cold, but old habits died hard. At exactly 10 a.m., there was a soft knock on the door. "Come in," Gabriel called, standing as Jasmine entered. She looked smaller than he remembered, her shoulders hunched slightly as if bracing for impact. Her eyes darted around the room nervously before settling on him. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Murphy?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with apprehension. "Yes, thank you for coming," Gabriel replied, gesturing toward one of the chairs opposite his desk. "Please sit." Jasmine hesitated for a moment before complying. She perched on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "I'll get straight to the point," Gabriel began, leaning forward slightly. "I saw you last night." Her eyes widened and color drained from her face. "You, what?" "In the cafeteria," he clarified. "And afterward, when you went home." For a moment, Jasmine seemed too stunned to respond. Then anger flickered in her expression, quickly followed by shame. She stood abruptly, backing away from the desk. "I don't know what you think you saw, but I haven't done anything wrong," she stammered, her voice rising. "If this is about the food, I can explain." "No, wait," Gabriel interrupted, holding up a hand. "That's not why I called you here. Please, sit back down. Let me finish." Reluctantly, Jasmine returned to her seat, though her body remained rigid, ready to bolt at any moment. "I followed you because I was curious," Gabriel admitted. "But what I found," he paused, searching for the right words. "It made me realize how little I truly know about the people who work for me. About you." Jasmine blinked, caught off guard by the vulnerability in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Gabriel continued, "that I've spent years focusing on profits and numbers, thinking I was doing enough just by providing jobs. But last night, I saw something I can't ignore. I saw a mother working tirelessly to take care of her children, only to come home to barely anything." His gaze locked onto hers, unflinching. "And it made me question whether I'm really fulfilling my responsibility as a leader." Jasmine stared at him, her defenses wavering. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked quietly. "Because I want to help," Gabriel said simply. "Not just you, but everyone in similar situations. People who are struggling silently while we sit in our ivory towers, oblivious to their pain." Jasmine shook her head, disbelief etched into her features. "Help? How? You don't even know me." "That's true," Gabriel acknowledged. "But I'd like to start. And I need your help to make real change happen." She frowned, suspicion creeping back into her expression. "What kind of change?" Gabriel leaned back in his chair, gathering his thoughts. "First, I want to propose a plan to improve wages across the board. Second, I want to implement a child care support program so parents like you don't have to choose between feeding your kids and keeping your job. Third," he hesitated, knowing this next part might be controversial. "I want to use my influence to push for broader systemic changes within the company to make something that prioritizes employee well-being over short-term profits." Jasmine listened intently, her initial skepticism giving way to cautious hope. "That sounds incredible," she admitted. "But why now? Why me?" "Because you showed me what's at stake," Gabriel replied honestly. "You reminded me that behind every number on those spreadsheets, there's a person with dreams, fears, and responsibilities. If I'm going to lead this company, I need to do better for all of you. Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. I don't know what to say, she murmured. This isn't what I expected when I walked in here today. Neither did I, Gabriel admitted with a wry smile. But sometimes unexpected things lead to meaningful change. There was a long pause as Jasmine processed everything he had said. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll help you. But only if you promise this isn't just some PR stunt. These families deserve more than empty promises. It's not a stunt, Gabriel assured her. This is personal now. For both of us. With that, they began outlining the details of the proposal. Over the next hour, Jasmine shared insights into the challenges faced by low-wage workers while Gabriel took notes, asking thoughtful questions and refining his ideas. By the end of their meeting, they had drafted a preliminary plan that addressed immediate needs while laying the groundwork for long-term improvements. As Jasmine prepared to leave, she turned back to Gabriel, her expression softer now. Thank you, she said sincerely, for seeing us, for wanting to do better. Gabriel nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead to the next hurdle, convincing the board of directors to approve such radical changes. As the door clicked shut behind Jasmine, he knew the hardest part was yet to come, and he felt a spark of purpose, a belief that he could make a difference. The boardroom was a fortress of polished mahogany and gleaming glass, its air thick with the scent of expensive cologne and freshly brewed coffee. Gabriel stood at the head of the long table, his proposal neatly laid out before him, pages of data, charts, and projections detailing the benefits of increasing wages, implementing child care support, and prioritizing employee well-being. He had spent sleepless nights refining every detail, ensuring that his argument was bulletproof. But as he glanced around the room at the faces of Murphy Enterprises board members, he knew this would be no ordinary meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, Gabriel began, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. Thank you for taking the time to hear me out today. What I'm about to present isn't just a business strategy, it's a moral imperative. A murmur rippled through the room. Some leaned forward, intrigued, others exchanged skeptical glances. At the far end of the table sat Richard Gray, the company's CFO and one of Gabriel's most vocal critics. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable but undeniably hostile. Gabriel pressed on, unfazed. For too long, we've operated under the assumption that profit is our sole responsibility. But let me ask you this, what good is profit if it comes at the expense of the people who make it possible? Our employees are the backbone of this company, yet many of them struggle daily just to survive. This proposal aims to address these struggles. It is an action that will certainly benefit us all, and it is the right thing to do. He clicked a button on the remote and a slide appeared on the screen behind him. It showed statistics highlighting employee turnover rates, absenteeism, and productivity losses, all tied to financial stress and inadequate support systems. These aren't just numbers, Gabriel emphasized. They represent lives, families, futures. By investing in our workforce, we can reduce turnover, boost morale, and create a more sustainable model for growth. Richard raised an eyebrow. Sustainable? You're proposing significant increases in operational costs, Gabriel. Have you considered the impact on shareholder value? I have, Gabriel replied evenly. And I believe the short-term costs will pale in comparison to the long-term gains. Happier, healthier employees mean higher retention rates, reduced recruitment expenses, and improved performance across the board. Not to mention the positive PR boost when word gets out about our commitment to social responsibility. Another board member, Melissa Bennett, chimed in. That's assuming the public cares enough to notice or that they'll trust us after years of focusing solely on profits. People don't change their perceptions overnight. They won't, Gabriel admitted. Which is why this has to be genuine. We need to lead by example, not just pay lip service to change. That's why I'm proposing we start small but meaningful with initiatives like subsidized childcare and incremental wage increases. Over time, these efforts will speak for themselves. Melissa nodded thoughtfully, though her expression remained guarded. Others, however, weren't so easily swayed. This feels reckless, muttered Harry Jenkins, a senior investor known for his aversion to risk. You're talking about gutting margins to fund luxuries for low-level employees. Where does it stop? Next thing you know, we'll be handing out bonuses to janitors. A tense silence fell over the room. Gabriel clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, he took a deep breath and softened his tone. Harry, I understand your concerns, he said. But let me remind you of something. Every single person in this building relies on someone else to keep things running smoothly. The janitors clean the floors we walk on. The cafeteria staff prepare the meals we eat. And administrative assistants like Jasmine Price ensure that our operations flow without interruption. Without them, none of us would be sitting here today. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. This isn't about charity. It's about recognizing the value of every individual within this organization. If we want to thrive, we need to invest in the people who make that possible. The room erupted into heated debate. Some argued that Gabriel's plan was too ambitious and risky. Others cautiously supported the idea, acknowledging the potential benefits. Through it all, Gabriel remained composed, fielding questions and addressing objections with precision. But he could feel the tide turning against him. Doubt crept into his mind. Was he asking too much? Had he misjudged their willingness to embrace change? Just as the discussion seemed to reach an impasse, Gabriel made a bold move. "If you're still unsure," he said, standing up straighter, "I'd like to invite a few of you to see firsthand what I'm talking about. Tomorrow evening, I'll take anyone interested to visit the neighborhood where Jasmine lives. See the conditions she and others face daily. Talk to the families affected by our policies or lack thereof. Then decide whether this proposal is worth pursuing." The suggestion caught everyone off guard. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Richard broke the silence with a derisive laugh. "Are you serious? Dragging us into some slum tour to guilt-trip us into compliance?" "It's not about guilt," Gabriel shot back, his patience wearing thin. "It's about understanding. If we're going to make decisions that affect people's lives, shouldn't we at least know who they are and what they're dealing with?" To his surprise, Melissa raised her hand slightly. "I'll go," she said firmly. "If nothing else, it'll give us perspective." One by one, a handful of other board members reluctantly agreed. By the end of the meeting, Gabriel had secured tentative approval to move forward, but only on the condition that measurable results were delivered within 6 months. Failure would mean abandoning the initiative entirely. As the board filed out of the room, Gabriel exhaled deeply, sinking into his chair. Victory felt hollow. He had won a temporary reprieve, but the battle was far from over. Convincing the board was only the first step. Implementing the changes and proving their worth would require relentless effort and unwavering resolve. Later that night, as he reviewed the plans once more, Gabriel allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. This journey had already changed him in ways he never anticipated. From the shadows of the cafeteria to the harsh realities of Jasmine's world, each revelation had chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. Now, standing on the precipice of transformation, he realized that true leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about using it to uplift others. But as the weight of the challenges ahead settled over him, Gabriel couldn't shake the lingering question. Would it be enough? The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Gabriel threw himself into the implementation of the new initiatives with an intensity that surprised even those closest to him. The Child Care Support Program launched first, a partnership with local organizations to create a daycare center near Jasmine's neighborhood. It wasn't just for Murphy Enterprises employees, but also open to other families in the community, providing affordable care and educational resources for children. Wage increases came next, starting with the lowest-paid workers and gradually extending upward. Employees who had once struggled to make ends meet now found themselves able to afford groceries without rationing, pay rent on time, and even dream of vacations or savings accounts. For many, it was the first time they felt seen not as cogs in a machine, but as human beings deserving of dignity. Jasmine became the unofficial face of the initiative, working closely with Gabriel to ensure the programs addressed real needs. Her role evolved from administrative assistant to community liaison, giving her a platform to advocate for others like her. She spoke at town halls, coordinated outreach efforts, and served as a bridge between management and employees. Though she initially doubted her ability to step into such a visible position, her natural empathy and resilience quickly earned her respect across all levels of the company. One crisp autumn morning, Gabriel stood outside the newly opened daycare center, watching as parents dropped off their children. Laughter filled the air as kids ran through the playground, their faces glowing with joy. Inside, bright murals adorned the walls, depicting scenes of nature and imagination. Teachers greeted each family warmly, creating an atmosphere of trust and belonging. Jasmine approached him, holding the hand of her youngest child. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see something like this in our neighborhood." Gabriel smiled, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "Neither did I. But seeing it here, it makes me realize how much we've been missing." They stood together in silence for a moment, taking in the scene before them. Then Jasmine turned to him, her expression serious. "You've changed so many lives, Gabriel, including mine. Don't ever forget that." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "And you've reminded me what it means to lead with purpose. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me help." Back at the office, the changes rippled outward. Productivity soared as employees embraced their newfound stability. Turnover rates plummeted, saving the company millions in recruitment costs. Even investors began to take notice, impressed by the positive press coverage and the tangible improvements in performance metrics. Shareholders who had initially balked at the expense were now praising the decision as visionary. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within Gabriel himself. Once consumed by ambition and detachment, he now found fulfillment in the connections he forged, with his whole company and with the broader community. He attended school board meetings, advocated for policy changes, and partnered with local businesses to revitalize neglected areas. His vision expanded beyond profits to encompass something greater: the power of corporate responsibility to drive societal change. 6 months after the launch of the initiatives, the board convened for a final review. Gabriel entered the meeting with a mixture of hope and trepidation, knowing that the stakes were high. If the results didn't meet expectations, everything they had built could come crashing down. But since he had been following it closely, he was quite optimistic about the results. Melissa Bennett, who had accompanied Gabriel on the initial neighborhood visit, opened the discussion. "The data speaks for itself," she announced, gesturing to a presentation displayed on the screen. "Employee satisfaction has increased by 40%. Absenteeism is down 25%. And despite the upfront costs, overall profitability has risen by 12% compared to last year." Murmurs of approval spread throughout the room. Richard Gray, still skeptical but unable to deny the evidence, reluctantly nodded. "All right, Murphy," he conceded. "You've made your point. These programs work for now. But don't get complacent. We'll need continuous monitoring to ensure long-term success." "Agreed," Gabriel replied, relief washing over him. "This is only the beginning. There's still so much more we can do." Gabriel and his company's initiatives were so beneficial that he even received unexpected recognition. Even rival companies, upon seeing the results in the press, began similar actions in the city. The city mayor invited him to a ceremony honoring Murphy Enterprises' contributions to social welfare. Standing on stage beneath a spotlight, Gabriel accepted the award not as a personal triumph but as a testament to collective effort. "This honor belongs to everyone who believed in the possibility of change," he said during his speech, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "To the employees who inspired us, the communities that welcomed us, and the leaders who dared to challenge the status quo. Together, we've proven that success isn't measured by wealth alone. It's measured by the impact we have on the world around us." As applause erupted, Jasmine watched from the audience, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, her children clapped enthusiastically, their futures brighter than ever before. Later that night, Gabriel returned to his penthouse, exhausted but content. He stepped onto the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. For years, he had viewed the skyline as a symbol of power and achievement. Now, he saw it differently, as a tapestry of interconnected lives, each thread vital to the whole. His phone buzzed with notifications, messages of gratitude from employees, congratulatory emails from colleagues, and comments from viewers who had watched the ceremony online. One message caught his eye. It was from Jasmine. "Thank you for believing in us when no one else did. You've given us more than jobs. You've given us hope. We won't forget it." Gabriel set the phone down, a rare smile tugging at his lips. He knew the journey was far from over. Challenges would arise, setbacks would occur, and there would always be room for improvement. But he felt connected to something larger than himself. As the city stretched endlessly before him, Gabriel whispered to himself, almost reverently, "We're just getting started." What happens when one man decides to redefine success? If we stop to reflect, we understand that success is not only measured in profits and material goods, but in personal relationships, in the lives we touch. And true leadership isn't about power, it's about making a difference. Would you have had the courage to challenge the system like Gabriel did? If you enjoyed this story, please leave it a like and subscribe to embrace the journey. See you in the next video.